Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views. The time is 7 minutes past 9, and we're still reacting to last night's events. I think the headlines the world over around Iran launching those over 180 ballistic missiles targeting Israel, marking a significant escalation into the conflict. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed retaliation, warning Tehran of severe consequences. These attack follows Israel's major ground incursion in southern Lebanon, sparking fears of a broader Middle Eastern conflict involving Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, Yemen. And Iran's president defended the strikes as a response to Zionist aggression. And while global leaders urge for a ceasefire to prevent further violence, we have experts on the ground in Yemen, Gaza, in Jenin to break down the situation. But right now, we're heading over to Jerusalem. We'll be speaking to Professor Jeff Halper, who's going to be just unpacking for us his reaction from an Israeli's point of view. He's based in Jerusalem, and he'll be giving us insights on what he makes of last night's events. Professor Halper, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time, and always a pleasure having you here on Salam Media.
Thanks for having me.
Just a point of departure, your reaction to last night's events. I think very, very unprecedented. I think a mark has been said. It goes without a question that this will see the region, the Middle East, take a whole other different direction, but one that has always been coming for a very, very long time.
No, that's right. There's a two-phase reshaping of the entire region that's going on, and Israel is the agent of it. Israel is the vehicle through which the larger powers, especially the United States and NATO, are really trying to reshape the region. We might even say, together with the so-called moderate Sunni regimes, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and others. So the first phase, or not the first phase, let me say the smaller circle of this whole reshaping is, of course, Israel's aim to finally, once and for all, end its so-called conflict with the Palestinians, to complete its 130-year process of taking over Palestine, Judaizing Palestine, turning Palestine into a Jewish country. And so we've seen that Israel's conquered the entire historic Palestine already in 1967. It's now settled the West Bank and East Jerusalem. There's about 750,000 Israeli settlers. The Palestinians have been confined to little tiny areas called Areas A and B, and Gaza has been destroyed. So the Palestinians that remain there, if they're not evacuated to Western countries, that remain there will also remain in a tiny little enclave. So Israel's taken over now more than 90% of Palestine. And now it has to normalize that. It has to make that permanent. And so what it's doing now is mopping up. It's it's released the violent settlers on the West Bank and the army to clear the land of Palestinians, push them all into these little enclaves. It's breaking the last Palestinian resistance, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, in Tulkarm and the Jenin refugee camps. There's fighting on a Gaza scale that's going on now. And once the Palestinian resistance is finished, Israel is able to put in place its apartheid regime. And then the idea is, and this is what Biden and Saudi Arabia are pushing, then we'll get to normalization between Israel and the Sunni Arab world. That's the inner circle, and that's what's happening. But the bigger circle of that is, of course, that the United States is very concerned about Chinese incursion into the wider region. And so if Israel has become the major military power in the Middle East because of American weaponry and financial support, and so Israel has really been unleashed. And the idea is, okay, let's go with this momentum. We've finished with the Palestinians. Now normalization really means giving the Sunni Muslims the upper hand in the Middle East, destroying the Shiite Iranian-based challenge to Sunni domination in the Middle East. I mean, you see it also in Iraq, where you have almost a civil war going on in many ways, using the Houthis in Yemen and so on. And that's the second wider circle of what's going on now. Israel's been unleashed, and the idea is to go after the Shiite resistance, what Iran calls the circle of fire around Israel, the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq, and then Iran itself. So we'll see. I think the attack on Iran is going to be limited, but basically, by significantly weakening the proxies of Iran around and putting Iran on notice that Israel can be unleashed again at any time, I think, in a sense, those two things are in the process of being accomplished. One is the normalization of Israeli Zionist apartheid over all of historic Palestine, and the other one is the domination of Sunni Islam over the entire Middle East as a branch of Western hegemony, certainly against Iran, but also against China. I think that's the big picture.
And from the Iranians' point of view, I think, the question would be, what was the intention of yesterday's events, number one? And number two, the timing thereof. Why now?
Well, I think, on the one hand, it doesn't make much sense that Iran attacked Israel. I mean, I'm here in Jerusalem. We were watching the missiles and interceptors last night, while it was going on. It doesn't make sense, because really Iran has its own agenda, which again is Shia expansion or influence in the Middle East. The Palestinians really are marginal to Iran. And in many ways, so is Israel, except that Israel has become this major military vehicle for NATO and the US and the Middle East, which is a problem for Iran, of course. But it doesn't make so much sense because, Israel's going to hit Iran hard. So it could hit its oil facilities, it could hit its nuclear facilities. It doesn't make much sense on that. On the other hand, if there is this Shiite Sunni rivalry going on, and then behind that, of course, a Chinese Western NATO rivalry going on in the Middle East, Iran just couldn't sit passive. Iran couldn't show itself as a weak actor whose arms are being destroyed and not react. So I think it was forced to react, but I think it again reacted in a way that didn't cause any damage. Ironically, as far as I understand, there was one person killed here in the attack last night, and it was a Palestinian from the West Bank. How's that for an irony? But basically, it was
very ironic. Attack. Yes,
it was basically a symbolic attack, and I think they had to do it because they couldn't simply show themselves as passive and weak. But I think they did it. The signal was, all right, after this round, it's over, and we'll go, and Iran will go back and lick its wounds.
And just finally, because we have run out of time, now Iran's involvement, how do you think it changes the dynamics on the ground for Palestinians? Do you think it could lead to a more direct involvement from also other regional actors, or the status quo is going to remain? Yesterday's events have no impact. I think, as they were put by the Israeli forces, saying very, very minuscule. We're able to deal with it, and we move. Do you think this is going to change the dynamics of the 7th of October? Since now, is anything going to change, particularly from a Palestinian's point of view?
Well, I think from the Palestinian point of view, it's clear that armed struggle is simply not going to work. It's almost suicidal. You can't have armed struggle against a country as strong as Israel, backed up by the United States that has 80,000 troops in the Mediterranean. So that it has to be a political solution. I think the challenge to the Palestinians is this idea of normalization and the fact that they've been betrayed by the Arab governments. That's really the problem. The only ally that exists today for the Palestinians are the peoples of the world. We have to rise up, and you've been doing that in South Africa. South Africa going to the ICJ, the ICC, within the UN. We have to create counter forces. But unfortunately, normalization is really an Israeli victory. And normalization cannot happen. The Palestinians cannot be defeated. Israel cannot win without the support of the Arab states, of the Sunni Arab states, from Jordan to Morocco, basically being a part of this. And that, I think, is a challenge within the Muslim world to begin to call these Arab Muslim governments to task and say, hey, you should not be part of the destruction of the Palestinian people.
We've seen some very, very strong reactions from world leaders regarding yesterday's events. How do you assess, just briefly, the role of international players in this conflict, particularly, I think you mentioned a few times, the US. What position are they in right now? And also some of the European countries. And is there enough being done to address the root cause, or is the focus primarily on supporting Israel, as we heard from the U.S.?
It's supporting Israel. I mean, the U.S. has brought massive military force into the Middle East to warn Iran. Not, as a matter of fact, the Israeli attack on Iran, whenever it comes, the counterattack, is going to be done in cooperation with the U.S. Israel's not going to be allowed to do it by itself. So this is all orchestrated. And, in Europe, they might criticize here and there Israel, but basically Europe is part of NATO. And this is, part of, the NATO attempt to keep its hegemony over the Middle East. The big problem, again, is the counterweight to the global north we had hoped would be the BRICS countries, of which South Africa is a part, you see. But BRICS has stayed out of this completely. Where's China? I mean, China is an ally of Iran in a way. It's a very important importer of Iranian oil. India has supported Israel, tremendously. Russia has stayed out of it. So the big problem is the major political counterweight to NATO and the global north and the US, which is BRICS, has basically stayed out of it. And I wrote a book called War Against the People that deals with this. How does Israel get away with this? Because Israel supplies weapons to China. It's, I think, the number 2 exporter of weapons to India. Almost every country in the BRICS alliance is receiving arms from Israel. And so if they're not pro-Israel, if they're not going to intervene on the side of the Palestinians, at least they'll stay out of it. And if they stay out of it and they leave that vacuum, and Iran and the Palestinian resistance groups become the only resistance to Israeli colonialism and Western hegemony in the region, then really it's difficult. And in a way, the only political allies, again, the Palestinians have are the peoples of the world. And we have to work to mobilize them. But again, I think there should be within the Muslim world pressure put on these Arab countries that are supporting the global West against the global North, against the Palestinians and against the peoples of this region. But as we know, those Arab countries are also autocratic. And they're against their own people. So you're kind of blocked in every way you go.
And internally in Israel, how were last night's events received by the population?
It's become kind of routine. I think everybody relies on Iron Dome, on the Israeli defensive systems. Of course, the United States, also participated in intercepting Iranian missiles. I don't know this time, but last time Jordan participated in intercepting. and I think this time too, Jordan did as well. So in a way, Israel has this envelope of security, its own defense systems, the defense systems of the local governments around, the defense systems of the United States. And so, it only has a limited capacity, basically, Iran, I think, to attack Israel. So Israelis just took it in stride. I went out. I didn't even go to the shelter. I went out. I looked in the sky. I saw all the lights. I heard a few booms. And that was basically it. So Israelis are sort of learning, in a way, to live with it. But I think they live with it under the understanding that the United States especially has created an umbrella over Israel that really makes it very secure. So it's unleashed its political animal, which is Israel, to do all its work in the region. But at the same time, then it's also protecting its political animal from doing, from being accountable, from paying any kind of a price.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Professor Jeff Halper coming to us live from Jerusalem. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your expert analysis. Always appreciated here on Salam Media.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, still sticking with the theme, but we'll be heading over to Jenin. We'll be speaking to a journalist, Osama Nazal, who's going to be giving us their reaction to yesterday's events. 180 missiles, ballistic missiles, that were catapulted into Israel by Iranian forces. More on that after this.